I was 19 the summer I stayed at Jude's house. His mom, Marianne, offered the spare room while he was away at a church retreat in Colorado. I had nowhere else to be that week. The dorms were closed for maintenance, and my own parents had moved overseas that spring. Jude said, "It's just my mom. She won't even notice you're there." But she did. From the second I arrived, I could tell Marianne noticed everything. The house was quiet in a way that made every sound feel deliberate. The ticking of the hallway clock, the creak of the stairs, even the way the refrigerator hummed too loud in the kitchen. When I came in with my duffel bag slung over one shoulder, she smiled and brushed her hair behind one ear. Her posture was tall but gentle, like someone who had taught herself to carry stillness. "I put clean sheets on the bed," she said. "The window sticks a little, but if you push from the left side, it'll open." I followed her up the narrow stairs. Her hand hovered near the banister, fingers not quite touching it. The guest room was smaller than I expected. Soft light coming through cream curtains, a book of poetry left beside the lamp. There was a small painting on the wall, something abstract in muted blue. On the dresser, a silver-framed photo of her and a man, smiling, arms around each other, lay face down. She noticed me looking. Without explaining, she walked over and adjusted the curtains instead. "I know it's not much," she said, straightening the edges of the quilt. "But you're welcome to anything in the fridge. Just label anything you don't want me to. Toss." I nodded and thanked her, unsure how to stand or sit. I remember the clock outside ticking louder than it should have, like time was announcing itself, daring us to acknowledge it. She glanced at my hands, still clutching the strap of my bag, and gave the faintest smile. "You're safe here," she said, and then left the room. That I stood there for a long time after she closed the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because the bed was uncomfortable or because I missed home. I didn't. It was the house. The silence felt intentional, like it had been carved out over years, like it had a shape. I kept hearing footsteps downstairs, soft, thoughtful steps. And once, just before midnight, I heard the kettle whistle. That I wanted to go down and say something. Ask for tea, maybe. But I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had turned that photo down on purpose. Wondering if she did that every night. The next morning, I found a clean mug waiting on the kitchen counter, next to a handwritten note. "There's fresh coffee in the pot. Help yourself." She was already outside, watering the plants in bare feet. She didn't wave, but when she looked back at me through the window, her expression wasn't cold, just unreadable, like a book missing its last chapter. That was day one. And already, I could feel something I wasn't supposed to feel. Not attraction, exactly. More like gravity. A pull. A quiet recognition between two people who knew how to be alone, even in a room full of noise. And in her house, there was no noise. Just that clock. Still ticking. Still reminding us. Thursday started slow. I woke to the sound of birds and the smell of toast, faint and warm. By the time I came downstairs, the kitchen was already cleaned up, the dishes air-drying beside the sink. Marianne was outside, crouched in the garden, tugging at something tangled in the hose. She looked up when I stepped out. "Do you know anything about water pressure?" she asked. "Not really," I said, though I crossed the yard anyway. I took the hose from her, careful not to brush her hand. The nozzle was clogged with mud, and I cleared it with a bent paperclip while she leaned back on her heels, watching. "I would've just bought a new one," she said. "But there's something satisfying about fixing something instead." "I get that," I said, even though I didn't really. I like new things. Clean slates. She seemed to like things that had been worn in. People, too, maybe. We ended up spending the morning doing nothing important. I helped carry in groceries from her car. She had forgotten half the things on her list. She laughed when she realized it, a soft, throaty laugh that caught me off guard. She had dimples when she smiled. Not deep, but just enough to notice. Back inside, she wore an oversized navy sweater and wireframe glasses as she unpacked, sleeves pushed halfway up her arms. She looked more like an artist than someone's mom. Or maybe just a woman who had stopped caring what people expected her to look like. I watched her organize the pantry alphabetically. I asked if she always did that. "Only when I'm avoiding things," she said, without looking up. Later, we sat on the back porch. She made tea in a blue ceramic pot and poured it into mismatched cups. Mine had a chip in the rim. Hers had a faded sunflower on it. We watched the sun dip slightly, not setting yet, just lowering into a slower rhythm. She asked, "Have you ever been in love?" The question hung there. Not heavy, just unexpected. I thought about it. About girls from class. Kisses in parking. Lots. Late night texts. But nothing that felt like the thing she meant. "I don't know yet," I said. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were greenish, or maybe gray, the kind that changed depending on the light. "Good," she said. "That means you'll recognize it when it happens." I tried to smile, but my face betrayed me. I felt too young all of a sudden, like a child pretending to be older than he was. We sat there until the tea cooled. She didn't ask more. I didn't offer. That night, I stayed up late again, reading with my lamp on. The house made its usual sounds, the fridge clicking, a floorboard shifting. Around midnight, I heard her footsteps in the hallway. They were soft, slow. She paused outside my door. I stopped breathing. There was a moment, 5, maybe 6 seconds, where nothing happened, just the weight of her presence on the other side. No knock, no words. Then the footsteps moved on, fading down the hall like a thought you don't finish. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wide awake in a quiet house that suddenly felt full of things unsaid. The storm began in the distance. A low rumble that could have been a truck passing or thunder curling just beyond the hills. I was at the kitchen sink, rinsing an apple, when the lights flickered. Not enough to go dark, just enough to remind me that nature still had say in things. Rain started soon after. Slow, insistent drops against the window pane. I walked toward the living room, unsure where Marianne had gone. The house, always quiet, felt softer now, like it was listening. I found her in the kitchen, crouched near the cabinet under the sink, pulling out a box of half-used candles. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Power's twitchy when it rains like this," she said. "Better to be ready." She struck a match, and for a moment her face glowed amber. Cheekbones lit gently, eyes catching shadows. She moved slowly, like someone who'd done this before, who welcomed the chance to slow things down even further. "Do you want to sit with me?" she asked. I nodded. We didn't turn on music, just sat at the dining table near the window, watching the storm fold itself into the night. She poured red wine into 2 short glasses without asking if I wanted any. I didn't stop her. The candlelight flickered on the walls. The ticking clock had stopped. She wrapped her sweater tighter around her and leaned back in the chair like she was finally allowed to exhale. "Storms make me feel like the world is telling us to rest," she said. I swirled the wine, unsure how to sit, unsure how to drink. It tasted warm and sharp. She glanced toward the windows, then back at me. "You still writing?" I looked down, trying to. "What do you write about?" I hesitated, then pulled the small notebook from my back pocket, the one I kept for things I didn't know how to say out loud. I flipped to a page, heart suddenly thudding for no good reason, and read, "Loneliness isn't loud. It's the sound of your own breathing after you realize no one else is home." I didn't look up right away. When I did, her gaze hadn't moved. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people give when they recognize something they've felt before. "That's not just a young man's feeling," she said. We sat in the hush of the rain for a long time after that. The wine softened the edges of everything. The candlelight made the world smaller, safer. And at one point, so quietly it might not have even happened, her hand brushed mine on the table. Just a flicker of skin. A pulse. I didn't move. Neither did she. Outside, the rain picked up. Lightning flashed once, briefly outlining her silhouette against the window. She looked at me, not searching, not questioning, just present. Fully present, as if the rest of the world had blurred. She stood slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should get some sleep," she said. But her voice trembled at the end. I didn't answer, just nodded. She paused at the doorway for a moment too long, then disappeared up the stairs. I sat there for a while, listening to the storm and wondering what that moment meant, or if meaning it would only ruin it. The candle burned down low. The wine went untouched after that, and when I finally got up to go to bed, the chair she'd been sitting in was still warm. The storm had passed, but I couldn't sleep. The house held the scent of wet earth and extinguished candle wax. I lay still in the dark for a long time, eyes tracing shapes on the ceiling, ears tuned to the softest creaks, wood shifting, a faucet dripping, time folding in on itself. Eventually, I gave up trying. The floor was cold under my feet. I walked down the hall quietly, trying not to disturb the stillness. I didn't know what I was looking for. maybe water, maybe quiet company. The light was low, barely there. Moonlight spilled in through the tall window at the end of the hall, soft and silver. And she was standing in it. Marianne. She was in a robe, her arms folded loosely across her chest, her hair down around her shoulders like I'd never seen it before. She didn't startle when she heard me. Didn't move, didn't speak. I couldn't sleep, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, slow and quiet. Me neither. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was fuller than any conversation we'd had. She was staring out the window, at nothing in particular. Just the wet lawn below, maybe, or the dark, or her own reflection in the glass. I took a step closer, unsure of the rules now, unsure if there were any left. She didn't look at me when she spoke. You're not a boy, she said. But you're not quite a man either, are you? I swallowed but said nothing. Her voice was soft, distant. When I was your age, I thought people in their 40s would have everything figured out, that they'd be sure of themselves. Whole. But it doesn't work like that. The body ages faster than the heart does. I leaned against the opposite wall. The hallway was narrow enough that we were close, too close for it to feel neutral. I'm not even sure I know who I am yet, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. That made her turn. Her eyes met mine in the low light. That's not a bad thing, she said. It means you're still growing. We stood like that for a long moment. The old floor creaked beneath us. A clock ticked somewhere far off. I noticed then that her robe sleeve was frayed at the edge. Her nail polish had chipped. She looked like someone who didn't bother pretending anymore, and there was something devastatingly beautiful about that. She took a slow breath and stepped closer. I didn't move. Couldn't. Her hand reached up, not to touch, just to hover near my cheek, like she was remembering something, or seeing someone else in my face. Someone long gone. I used to love a boy who looked at me the way you do, she said. But he left before we figured anything out. She stepped even closer. I felt her breath before I felt her touch. She leaned in, slowly, carefully. Her lips met mine like a secret, soft and searching. Not urgent, not wild, just real, just enough to remember. I didn't kiss her back at first. I just let it happen. Let the moment hold me. Then something inside me gave way, and I did. There was nothing messy about it. Nothing wrong, even though every rule in the world might have said otherwise. It felt like something outside of time, like we'd stepped sideways into a place where memory and longing had permission to meet. When she pulled back, her hand lingered at the side of my face. Her voice was quiet, almost breaking. Go back to bed. I stood there for a moment, still caught in the warmth of her touch, the scent of rain still clinging to her hair. Then, I turned and walked back down the hallway, barefoot on old wood, the air charged with something that would never be spoken aloud. The moment was over, but it never really ended. The smell of eggs and toast woke me before I was ready. I blinked against the morning light slipping through the curtains, unsure if the night before had actually happened or if I'd dreamt the whole thing into being. But the way my chest ached, low and quiet, told me it had been real. Downstairs, Marianne was already in the kitchen, moving with quiet efficiency. Her back was to me as she stood at the stove, spatula in one hand, her robe replaced by a crisp button-down shirt tucked into faded jeans. Her hair was pulled up. She looked composed, like someone hosting a polite guest, not like someone who had kissed me just hours earlier in a hallway full of shadows. Hungry? She asked without turning that I said yes. My voice cracked a little, but I don't think. She noticed. The kitchen felt different that morning. Not colder, not tense, just more careful. Like a room that knew something delicate had happened and didn't want to disturb it. She placed a plate in front of me. Eggs, toast, and half a grapefruit. Then returned to pour coffee into two mismatched mugs. Hers was the same sunflower. One from before. Cream? She asked. No, thanks. She didn't sit right away. She wiped the counter with a cloth that didn't need wiping, adjusted the blinds that didn't need adjusting. And when she finally did sit, she didn't look at me. Not directly that we talked about simple things. The weather. My train time. Whether I'd found the spare towel in the closet. Nothing more. I watched the way she moved, how she folded the napkin on her lap, how her fingers curled gently around the coffee cup. Every gesture felt precise, not distant, but deliberate, as if creating space was her way of being kind. There was no mention of the hallway, no mention of the way her lips had found mine like a secret too old to keep. Nothing in her eyes suggested she was pretending. It was more like she had folded the moment neatly and tucked it away in a place I wasn't meant to reach. When it was time to go, she walked me to the front door. I stood there with my duffel bag slung over one shoulder again, unsure if I should hug her or thank her or say anything at all. She opened the door, sunlight falling across the floor between us. "Have a safe trip," she said. I nodded. "Thanks again. For everything." She nodded too, not smiling, just present, just here. And then, just as I turned to step out, she added, "Don't stay a stranger." Her voice was even, soft, like wind passing through a screen door. I wanted to say something more, something real, but it wouldn't have changed anything. I left. I didn't look back until I reached the corner of her street. And when I did, she was already gone from the doorway. Jude never asked how my stay went. I think he assumed his mom kept to herself, and I hadn't done anything worth mentioning. I didn't correct him. I never told anyone. I didn't write about it for a long time. But eventually, one winter, I did. I changed her name, changed mine. I turned it into fiction, or at least pretended to. It was published in a small college zine no one read. But I didn't care. I knew what it was. I knew who it was. Years have passed now. I'm older than she was that summer. I've loved people since. Some deeply, some not at all. But every now and then, usually in quiet moments, walking home in the rain, hearing a clock tick in someone else's hallway, I think of her. I remember the way she looked at me that night in the dark, not like a woman breaking rules, but like someone searching for something long buried. I remember the way she stepped back after kissing me, as if pulling herself out of a dream. And I remember the sound of her voice the next morning, soft and steady, as if she hadn't let herself break at all. But the clearest thing I remember, the thing that won't fade, is the way she turned before closing her bedroom door. Just a glance over her shoulder. Just enough to say everything we couldn't. We never spoke about that night again. But it still speaks to me.